They were Hollywood royalty, faces on every magazine cover, names etched into history. But behind the glittering lights and million-dollar smiles hid something far more disturbing. These weren't just tragic deaths, they were warnings. Behind every curtain call was a silent breakdown, a final scream ignored, and an ending too dark for the tabloids to print. These were stars chewed up by the same machine that once worshipped them. From chilling mysteries to slow descents into despair, these stories were never meant to be heard. But today, we're exposing 10 Golden Age legends who ended their lives in ways no one saw coming. James Whale. He was the man who gave us monsters, Frankenstein, the Invisible Man, Bride of Frankenstein. But in the end, it wasn't a creature that consumed James Whale. It was silence. Long after the applause faded, Whale found himself trapped in a different kind of horror, one with no script, no audience, and no escape. He'd been retired for years, living alone, largely forgotten by the studios that once praised his vision. A stroke had left him partially paralyzed. The pain never stopped. Neither did the nightmares. And in 1957, Whale turned his final scene into something horrifyingly poetic. He filled his pockets with stones, walked to his backyard pool, and let the water take him. No fanfare. No final curtain call. Just a man slipping beneath the surface like one of his own movie phantoms. It was a final act that no one could rewrite, planned, quiet, and devastatingly precise. He left behind a letter that explained everything, but no one wanted it published. It was too raw, too honest. In it, he confessed that the future terrified him, that the pain had become unbearable, that he was tired of pretending to be okay in a world that didn't care anymore. Hollywood kept his movies alive, but buried the man behind them. The genius who redefined fear was swallowed by the very loneliness he had spent years trying to direct into something beautiful. And unlike his monsters, James Whale didn't get a sequel. Jean Seberg. They found her days later, rotting in the front seat of her car, a blanket wrapped around her, a bottle of pills in her lap, and a silence so thick it could drown you. Jean Seberg was once the face of a movement, the muse of the French New Wave, the American rebel with a whisper of danger in her smile. But by the end, the danger wasn't cinematic. It was real. Jean had enemies, not in Hollywood, but in Washington. The FBI saw her as a threat. Why? Because she had donated to civil rights groups. Because she supported the Black Panthers. Because she refused to stay quiet. They retaliated with cruelty. Leaked lies to the press. Whispered that her unborn child wasn't her husband's, but the baby of a black activist. Jean was humiliated. Her baby died just days after birth. And from there, the spiral was brutal. Panic attacks. Insomnia. Constant surveillance. Anonymous threats. She stopped sleeping. Stopped smiling. Stopped acting. Then she vanished. By the time anyone thought to look, the car had already started to smell. Her death was ruled an overdose, but no one really believed it was just that. The story was too calculated, the fallout too precise. The woman who once captivated Europe was erased in America, first by the government, then by the industry that could have saved her but chose to look away. Jean didn't just fade. She was hunted, cornered, and quietly removed. And in the end, her silence was the only thing anyone wanted to hear. Alan Ladd. He had the jawline of a hero and the voice of a man who couldn't lose. In the 1940s, Alan Ladd was box office gold, an icon carved out of stone, lighting up the screen with effortless cool. But Hollywood doesn't do loyalty. When the spotlight shifted, so did the love. The roles dried up. The calls stopped coming. And the man who once played gunslinging legends was now just a shadow pacing empty hotel rooms, haunted by silence and memories no one wanted to hear. Alan never made a public scene. He didn't spiral in front of flashing cameras or crash out of the tabloids in flames. He drifted, quietly, painfully. The tough guy image was an illusion. Behind it was a man battling deep insecurity, addiction, and years of rejection. He leaned harder and harder on sleeping pills and alcohol, numbing the ache until it finally numbed everything. In 1964, at just 50 years old, Alan was found dead. His body still, his career long gone, and his legacy already fading. The official report called it an accident. But no one who knew him really believed that. This wasn't sudden. It was a slow unraveling. A man forgotten by the industry he once carried on his back. There were no dramatic headlines, no national mourning. Just a quiet funeral and a name slowly sinking into Hollywood's long list of discarded legends. Alan Ladd didn't go out with a bang. He was worn down, scene by scene, until there was nothing left to film. Lupe Vélez. Lupe Vélez wanted to die like a star, surrounded by flowers, beautifully dressed, resting peacefully like a tragic heroine from one of her films. But real life doesn't follow a script. And Lupe's final scene was nothing like the one she imagined. They found her on the bathroom floor, her silk nightgown soaked in vomit, eyes wide open, body twisted from the violent effects of the pills she'd swallowed. The plan was glamour. The reality was horror. She had once been the fiery Latina who set screens ablaze, bold, magnetic, impossible to ignore. But Hollywood only loved her when she fit their fantasy. When she got pregnant by a man who wanted nothing to do with her, or the child, everything unraveled. The studios turned their backs. The press sharpened their knives. She was pregnant, unmarried, and loud. And in 1944, that was a career death sentence. Lupe left behind a note scrawled in lipstick on a mirror, pleading, blaming, saying goodbye. But the studios scrubbed it from the story. They didn't want tragedy. They wanted silence. Her death was twisted into gossip, reduced to a cruel punchline about how she couldn't even get that right. What really happened was this: Lupe Vélez died exactly how she didn't want to. Alone, humiliated, and stripped of the dignity she spent her life fighting for. She tried to write her own ending, but Hollywood made sure someone else held the pen. Carole Landis. She was sunshine in heels, radiant, elegant, the kind of woman who turned heads without trying. Carole Landis had it all: studio contracts, adoring fans, and a place on Hollywood's A-list. But none of that mattered when it came to love. Behind the camera, Carole was entangled in a doomed affair with actor Rex Harrison, a man she loved deeply, but who refused to leave his wife. To the world, it was nothing. To Carole, it was everything. On July 5, 1948, she was found in her bathroom, still, lifeless, with a bottle of pills and a note hidden under her pillow. The note was for him. Rex was the last person to see her alive. He discovered her body, called his doctor, and waited hours before contacting the police. By then, it was too late, for Carole and for the truth. The studio went into crisis mode. They silenced reporters, buried the affair, and painted her death as an unfortunate tragedy of the heart. No scandal. No consequences. Just another pretty face laid to rest in a designer gown, the real story redacted. But those close to Carole knew the truth. She had begged for love, for marriage, for respect. What she got instead was rejection, secrecy, and a career teetering on the edge. She was 29. A woman who lit up the screen, discarded the moment she became inconvenient. In the end, Carole Landis wasn't just forgotten. She was erased, with only a whisper left behind. Marilyn Monroe. At 36 years old, she was the most desired woman on the planet. Marilyn Monroe wasn't just a star. She was an empire of fantasy, built on beauty, breathy laughter, and carefully staged vulnerability. But beneath the diamonds and dazzling gowns was a woman fraying at the edges. And on the night of August 4, 1962, everything fell apart. Her housekeeper found her naked, face down, with a phone in one hand and an empty bottle of barbiturates on the nightstand. The lights were still on. The door was locked. Marilyn Monroe was gone. The official story said overdose. But the rumors never died. Whispers of government involvement, FBI cover-ups, even connections to the Kennedys. And while the theories multiplied, the truth got lost in the noise. What is certain is this: Marilyn was exhausted. She was being drugged to sleep, exploited by studios, betrayed by lovers, and discarded by those who once swore they adored her. In her final days, she made panicked phone calls, wept uncontrollably, begged to be seen as more than a doll. But Hollywood doesn't listen. It consumes. By the time the world finally looked back, it was to mourn a myth, not a woman. She died as she lived, exposed, misunderstood, and watched by millions who only loved the version of her that didn't speak. Marilyn Monroe was never allowed to be real. And in the end, her silence spoke louder than any script she was ever given. Veronica Lake. She was the woman every man wanted and every woman tried to imitate. That peekaboo hairstyle covering one eye? It made her a sensation. Veronica Lake was the queen of film noir, mysterious, seductive, and unforgettable. But as quickly as she rose, Hollywood decided she wasn't worth the trouble. Studios labeled her difficult, said she drank too much, spoke her mind too often, and didn't know her place. And just like that, the offers stopped coming. She vanished from the spotlight. No headlines, no dramatic exit. Years later, she was found living in a rundown motel, sick, broke, and bartending to survive. Some customers didn't even recognize her. Others asked, "Weren't you?" And she'd just nod. Yes, she was. But there was nothing left of the icon. By the time she passed, the alcohol had done its job. Acute hepatitis finished what years of heartbreak and rejection had started. She was only 50. No farewell tour. No comeback. Just silence, a tired body, and a legacy that had been eroded by bitterness, illness, and time. Veronica Lake didn't explode. She eroded, bit by bit, until even the industry that made her a star forgot she had ever existed. She was once on every billboard, but she died in a rented room, uncelebrated, unseen, and drained by the same system that once painted her as untouchable. She didn't just fall out of fame. She was pushed, and no one looked back. George Reeves. He was Superman. Cape, boots, the whole fantasy. To an entire generation of children, George Reeves was the man who could fly. But off-screen, the only thing flying was his sense of purpose, straight into the ground. On June 16, 1959, George was found in his bedroom with a bullet wound to the head. A Luger pistol lay on the floor. His fiancée and a group of guests were downstairs. No one claimed to hear a shot. No one saw a thing. And just like that, the Man of Steel was gone. The official story? He took his own life. But the details never added up. Bruises on the body. A second bullet lodged in the floor. Glasses out of place. Witnesses contradicting each other. There were whispers of jealousy, mob ties, ex-lovers, and silent threats. But police closed the case quickly, because when Superman dies, no one wants to see the human behind the cape. George had been struggling. Hollywood had typecast him so deeply, no one could imagine him in anything else. He was broke, drinking heavily, battling depression. Kids would stop him in the street and ask why he couldn't actually fly. And deep down, maybe he wondered the same thing, why the fame didn't protect him, why the costume didn't save him. He died with the suit still hanging in the closet and 1,000 questions no one dared to ask. George Reeves wasn't bulletproof. And when he fell, no one in Hollywood caught him. Dorothy Dandridge. She broke every rule just by existing. Dorothy Dandridge wasn't just beautiful, she was groundbreaking. The first black woman ever nominated for a Best Actress Oscar. A symbol of possibility in an industry that never wanted her to shine too brightly. But success came with a price. Every red carpet was a battlefield. Every role, a fight to prove she was more than a fantasy for white Hollywood to admire but never fully accept. And when she stopped being profitable, they made sure she disappeared. On September 8, 1965, she was found dead in her apartment, alone, undressed, with an empty bottle of antidepressants nearby. The coroner blamed heart failure. But the real cause was years of slow, calculated erasure. Her finances were a mess. She'd been robbed by her manager. Hollywood had blacklisted her. The phone had stopped ringing. She was only 42. Dorothy's life was a constant negotiation, between being desirable and being dangerous, between applause and exile. They adored her beauty but rejected her humanity. She wasn't allowed to win. Not really. And when she fell, no one reached out. No one told the truth. Her death wasn't a spectacle. It was quiet, like so many of her battles, waged behind closed doors with no headlines, no tributes, no justice. Dorothy Dandridge gave everything to an industry that only wanted pieces of her. She didn't vanish. She was erased, systematically, cruelly, and far too soon. Susan Peters. She was supposed to be the next big thing. Susan Peters had talent, grace, and a future that seemed unstoppable. In the early 1940s, she was being groomed for stardom, already earning an Oscar nomination and headlining major films. But fate doesn't care about potential. One afternoon in 1945, a hunting trip turned into a nightmare. A dropped rifle discharged unexpectedly, and the bullet struck her spine. Just like that, Susan was paralyzed from the waist down. Her rising star fell in an instant. Hollywood didn't wait. Studios stopped calling. Directors lost interest. And though she tried to continue acting, from a wheelchair, no less, the roles were sparse, the enthusiasm gone. She became a symbol of tragedy rather than talent. And for someone whose entire identity had been shaped around motion, beauty, and grace, that loss was unbearable. She spent years trying to find a reason to keep going, teaching, writing, even acting again on occasion. But the spark dimmed. Depression took over. Her marriage crumbled. Her health declined. And in 1952, at just 31 years old, Susan Peters passed away from what was officially listed as kidney failure. But those close to her knew the truth. She had stopped eating, stopped trying, and let herself fade. Susan didn't go out in scandal. She didn't make headlines. She died the way Hollywood forgets women it can't use, quietly, tragically, and far too young. She was a promise never fulfilled. And no one stayed around long enough to ask why. They were legends, faces of a golden era, symbols of glamour, beauty, strength, and power. But behind every red carpet, behind every close-up, was a human being quietly unraveling. These weren't just Hollywood tragedies. These were stories of abandonment, exploitation, and silence. Fame gave them everything, until it gave them nothing. Studios loved them until they spoke up. Fans adored them until they aged. And when they fell apart, the same system that made them vanished. James Whale drowned in silence. Jean Seberg was hunted for her beliefs. Alan Ladd faded behind closed doors. Lupe Vélez died trying to make her final act beautiful. Carole Landis begged for love and got erased. Marilyn Monroe became a myth, but never got peace. Veronica Lake was reduced to a rumor. George Reeves died with his cape still hanging. Dorothy Dandridge was discarded after breaking barriers. Susan Peters? She just disappeared. They didn't just die. They were taken by a machine that never loved them back. If these stories moved you, drop a comment below. Because the only thing worse than being forgotten is never being remembered at all. And if you thought old Hollywood was all glamour and golden dreams, think again.